Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. In this episode, I'm going to begin the history section of my library. From 2020 through 2024, history became one of my favorite genres, and I amassed a large collection of history books. However, starting in 2024, and certainly by 2025, history had fallen out of favor with me. So some of what I've collected I have yet to get to. I'm going to start with this bookcase here. That is a 3-shelf bookcase, although I am also using the top shelf as a bookshelf as well. So it'll be 4. This bookcase really belongs in the little manga room, and I should get a bigger, taller bookcase to go in this space. I just need to get around to getting that bookcase. Also, as an aside, my mom's bookcase is also starting to overflow, so I need to get her one as well. Anyway, let's get on with this part of the library tour, because there are quite a lot of books on this top of the bookcase. So I'm going to start with the books that are piled on top of the books. So first up is The Age of Wonder, How the Romantic Generation Discovered the Beauty and Terror of Science by Richard Holmes. I have not gotten around to this book yet. I picked it up from Book Depository, which was an online bookseller based out of the United Kingdom for a number of years before its corporate overlord pulled the plug on it. Next is Game of Queens, The Women Who Made 16th Century Europe by Sarah Griswold. This is a history of the 16th century, which was noted by the fact that a number of women held positions of immense political power, both as regents and as queens regnant in their own right. I read some of this book a few years ago and didn't really get on with it all that much. Crusaders, An Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by Dan Jones. This is a history of the Crusades, both in the Middle East as well as, I think, in the what is now the Baltics. It has a very novelistic style that I'm not terribly all that fond of, and I really did not get on with this book, even though I did finish it. The Fourth Crusade and the Sack of Constantinople by Jonathan Phillips. I have not gotten around to this. Princes of the Renaissance, The Hidden Power Behind an Artistic Revolution by Mary Hollingsworth. So this is a history of the Renaissance. Have not gotten around to it yet, and really should try to find a spot for it in the Renaissance section of my library. How I prefer to organize the history section of my library is by subject and period. Although, given how it looks right now, there are some jumbled bits, particularly on this bookcase. Next is The Rising Sun, The Decline and Fall of the Japanese Empire, 1936 to 1945, by John Toland. This is volume 2. So I picked this up from either the Friends of the Library book sale in Waco. Every year, the Waco-McLean County Library System, the Friends organization, puts on a massive multi-day book sale in November. Or I might have picked it up from St. Edward's University. When I was a student there, they would put out donated books or de-access books, and you were free to take them. So I just don't quite remember where I got it, and I've never read it because obviously that's just volume 1, and I don't have volume... No. That's volume 2, and I don't have volume 1. Sticking with Japan, this is a modern history of Japan from Tokugawa times to the present by Andrew Gordon. Would love to have more Japanese history, but I don't. Next is Korea, New History of North and South by Victor D. Cha and Ramon Pacheco Pardo. So this is a history of Korea that came out a few years ago from Yale, and this is the paperback release. Have not gotten around to it. So starting on this side, so a good chunk of the first part of this section is of this shelf is Roman history. Starting with Antony and Cleopatra by Adrian Goldsworthy. So this is a dual biography and history of the period of Antony and Cleopatra's life and relationship. I think for the most part, I am not a fan of Adrian Goldsworthy. This is Pantheon by A New History of Roman Religion by Jörg Rupka, translated from the German by David M.B. Richardson. Have not read this. Picked it up from Princeton University Press a few years ago during one of their 70% off sales or 75% off sales. This is Gladius, The World of the Roman Soldier by Guy de la Bottolière. So this is just about Roman military history. Picked it up from the University of Chicago Press during one of their big sales. This is perennially in their sale catalog. Did not get on with it when I tried to read it about 2 or so years ago. I'm really not a fan of Guy de la Bottolière. His work often reads more like a textbook than a more engaging work of history. This is Hadrian, The Restless Emperor by Anthony R. Burley. So, biography of Hadrian. Have not gotten around to it yet, but perhaps for people April. So back to Goldsworthy with the Punic Wars. So this is a history of the 3 wars waged between Rome and the city of Carthage, which was located on the North African coast in what is now Tunisia. So this is the first work of Goldsworthy that I've ever read, and I don't think I particularly cared for it all that much, but it has been a very long time since I read it. More by Goldsworthy. This is Rome and Persia, the 700-year rivalry. So this is a history of Rome's conflict with Persia, or various iterations of the Persian Empire. It is very much from the Roman perspective, which is what ticks me off about this book, because, well, I mean, if you're going to have a book where you have 2 equal antagonists to each other, well, they both should have nearly as much focus and as much sources as you can source from both sides. And while, yes, there's a huge amount of Roman stuff and not always a whole lot of Persian stuff, but you could try to do it. Okay, moving on from Rome. This is Iron Curtain, The Crushing of Eastern Europe, 1944 to 1956, by Anne Applebaum. So this is the history of the Soviet conquest of Eastern Europe and the imposition of communist regimes in Eastern Europe in the late 40s and early 1950s. Quite interesting, quite harrowing. I read this about sometime in 2020 or 2021. So next is one of the books that got me into history in 2020, and that is Post-Wall, Post-Square, How Bush, Gorbachev, Kohl, and Ding Shaped the World After 1989 by Christina Spohr. So this is a history of the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, focusing specifically on East Germany and the reunification of Germany, Hungary, Poland, and a little bit of Tiananmen Square as well. Next is Not 1 Inch, America, Russia, and the Making of Post-Cold War Stalemate by Emmy Sarot. So this is, again, a history of the post-Cold War world and the expansion of NATO. This book was shortlisted back in 2022 for the Kindle History Prize. In 2022, I had a big yin for the Kindle History Prize, and I wanted to read the entire shortlist. It did not work out well. And this was one of the books that I did not get on with, and I've never really gotten on with it. Try as I might. Western Europe's Democratic Age, 1945 to 1968 by Martin Conway. Have not gotten to this yet. Picked it up from Princeton during one of their sales. Ditto, Europe since 1989, a history by Philip Thur. And The Wind from the East, French intellectuals, The Cultural Revolution and the Legacy of the 1960s by Richard Wolin, which I don't think this is translated. Next is Post-War, A History of Europe Since 1945 by Tony Ute. Have not gotten around to this. I would like to give another look at some point when I'm back on with history to The Global Age, Europe 1950 to 2017 by Ian Kershaw. So, Against the World, Anti-Globalism and Mass Politics Between the World Wars by Tara Zara. This was longlisted, maybe shortlisted for the Kindle Prize in 2023 or 2024. I don't remember which. But I gave it a look and I didn't like it. Back to Rome with Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe by Judith Herron. So this is a history of the city of Ravenna from the end of the western half of the Roman Empire up through to, I think, the first formation of the Holy Roman Empire, or something like that. Took me a bit to get into, but when I did, it was fairly good. And Byzantium, The Decline and Fall by John Julius Norwich. This is the third volume of Norwich's trilogy of his Byzantine history, or the history of the Eastern Roman Empire. I've read bits of the trilogy, but that was a very long time ago. And this is the only volume of this that I have. And it is an ex-library copy from the Waco-McLennan County Library. And one of these days I will learn how to clean up the excess library copies because I have quite a bit of that. So moving on to the other side. This other side is, I had thought would be mostly Renaissance history, but this first book is not Renaissance history. It is Holy Madness, Romantics, Patriots, and Revolutionaries, 1776 to 1871, by Adam Zamoyski. So this is a history of radical politics from the American Revolution through the French Revolution, Napoleon, the various attempts to restore Napoleonic France, also the sort of the unification of Italy and the conspiracies that went along with that, conspiracies against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, attempts to reunify Poland, and of course, ultimately the fall of Napoleon III in the Franco-Prussian War. So this was a pretty good book. I rather enjoyed it. Although whether or not I will ever reread it, I don't know. Okay, this is The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 to 1790, by Richie Robertson. So this is a history of the Enlightenment that came out in 2020 or 2021. And I picked it up and have never gotten on with it. So now we come to the Renaissance part of that shelf. The Beauty and the Terror, the Italian Renaissance and the Rise of the West, by Catherine Fletcher. So this is a really good history. I really enjoyed it when I read it back in 2020 or 2021. So the next two are releases from last year. First up is Inventing the Renaissance, The Myth of a Golden Age, by Ada Palmer. So this is both a history of the Renaissance as well as a history of how the Renaissance came to be, in a sort of how later generations of scholars constructed the idea of the Renaissance. If you've been following along with my channel in 2025, you will know that I have struggled mightily with this book. I gave it a good go shortly after I got it, and then I read a little bit more of it in, I think, October and November, and eventually gave up. It's just, it never, I don't know if necessarily it's because I need to take like very long breaks from reading chunks of the book, or the book just isn't for me. I don't know. And the other big old history of the Renaissance that came out last year is The World at First Light, a new history of the Renaissance by Bernd Rueck, translated from the German by Patrick Baker. And this is definitely a brick of a book. Both The World at First Light and Inventing the Renaissance I picked up on deals from both the University of Chicago Press and Princeton. Because University of Chicago Press will sometimes have a deal on for books that have just come out. And Princeton has an ongoing 30% off sale. So that's what I did there. So that concludes the first shelf of my history tour. The next episodes, I will probably be sitting on the floor and we'll be doing each shelf on its own. So anyway, BookTube, look forward to that tomorrow. Until then, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.